Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me. It's Jason Levine here, Beetle Jace, coming to you live from the desert, back in my usual digs, here to present part 10. Oh my god, are we 10 episodes into this already? Yes, we are. Part 10 of Audio 101, dealing with EQ today. We're going to talk about how to use various different types of equalization, equalizers, for any DAW, any digital audio workstation, and this knowledge can be applied to using an EQ in Premiere, using an EQ in Audition, any EQ. It doesn't really matter. And I think Michael actually was just saying that just a moment ago. Let me just drop this down just a little bit more. So how is everyone today? Hey, Zeke, Dan I.O., how are you? Ian Livesy's here. Kitty, CBR. Mirani's asking about an Adobe Community place to collaborate and challenge each other on certain levels. Well, you know, we do have the Creative Jams. We just had one last week, coming live from the Adobe offices, myself and Michael Shez, whom you just saw, along with a series of very talented special guests. We're sort of doing a competition collaboration online, and we had people contribute outside of that. You might want to look at Behance, though. Behance is a great place to find people to work with, collaborate with, and get inspiration from. All right, I am fine, Zeke. Great to see you all here. Hey, Ihajo. All right, so as mentioned, I'm really going to go into the basics today of using equalization, when and where, and how, and kind of showcase 4 of the major types of equalization that we have in Audition and Premiere. But again, these same techniques, same filters, you'll find in every kind of application for video or audio, whether it's video editing like Premiere, Avid, Final Cut, Nuendo, Pro Tools, doesn't matter. You can use this information in all of those. Now, let's kill this music because it's driving me crazy. Now you'll see on screen right now just kind of the look of some of the various different EQs. Hey Neil, good to see you. And Cliff1, what is up? Dominic, oh, it is my pleasure and so great to see you here. So this is kind of giving you a visual of some of the standard types of EQs that we have. And before we just go through them all here, I made another wonderful text edit graphic for you. You saw me on stream last week talking about, you know, my font anxiety and design anxiety. Yeah, I'm just doing it in text edit. So 4 different EQ types that we'll sort of cover and go over today. And these are the 4 that you will encounter most commonly. The first 2 really being the most common of all. The graphic equalizer, the graphic EQ, and you can see that up here, and we'll talk about that in a second. The parametric EQ, and really these 3 here are all parametrics. And then we have something called a notch filter, which you can see down here, kind of in the bottom left-ish, which allows you to very specifically, with very, very narrow bandwidths, notch out or attenuate troublesome frequencies. Notch filters traditionally have been used for attenuating or removing things like 50 cycle or 60 cycle hum or very high-pitched noise. Again, this kind of comes out of a classic equalization process for removing those things. Of course, today we have many different ways to remove hum and that other kind of those other kinds of sonic anomalies. And then an FFT filter, which I actually have hidden at the moment, but that's the last one we'll talk about. An FFT filter, or the FFT filtering, allows you to perform all the things that you can do in a notch, but you just with a little bit more. So we're going to get to that, and I'll show you some of the cool presets and things that I've built in there that you can use today for doing things like removing plosives, microphone, rumble, you know, all kinds of other little specific EQ presets that can help you in production. Okay, so graphic, parametric, notch, and FFT. And as mentioned, here in Audition, I just pulled up a bunch of these. I've got them set on a track. So this is the classic graphic equalizer. And if you go up into the effects menu or from the effects rack here, you'll see that we have no fewer than 3 different types of graphic equalizers. And just to kind of go through why we have a 10, a 20, and a 30 band, well, bands relate to the number of sort of frequency sections that you have the ability to boost or cut. So this is a 30 band equalizer, meaning that we're going to have 30 sliders, right, representing small incremental levels of different frequencies to allow you to really tweak in a more refined kind of way individual frequencies to, again, bring out, more bass or more treble, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Now, you found these traditionally, a lot of your old school stereo systems, preamplifiers, amplifiers would have some kind of a graphic equalizer. You may have seen things here, if I just pull up the 10 band for a second here. You may have seen or have heard where they talk about kind of, if you want to make something kind of sound good on a stereo, just give it the traditional smile curve, which is something like this, which basically means that you sort of boost the bass, you cut the mids, and then you start to increase the highs, and you get this nice little right? And whereas in the past, particularly in the 60s and 70s, where the mid-range was really boosted to bring out voice and vocals, and we'll talk about key frequencies that are used to bring out vocal presence, clarity, and those kinds of things. Because those were accentuated, you'd often find that you get it home and things were kind of mid-rangey. And you really wanted more bass and more brightness, more treble, and less of that mid-range. So you boosted the extremes and dropped the middle, and that was kind of known as the little smiley face here. And you'd see that on a lot of EQs on stereos in the past. Now again, this is a 10 band, meaning that you only have 10 different EQ sliders that will affect the 10 specific frequencies. You can hear we've got sort of some subsonics here. This is 31 hertz, very low frequency. 63 hertz, this is typically the fundamentals of your kick drums. 125 hertz, this is sort of traditionally around the fundamental of where you might find the hit of a snare drum. Not the crack of a snare drum, that comes a bit higher, but that kind of low end, that fatness that you want in a snare, that fundamental is usually around 125, 150. And then you got 250 hertz. So this is kind of in the range where we often talk about muddiness, when audio sounds kind of muddy or just sort of muffled. That is traditionally in the range of 200, 250, or even as low as 170 to maybe around 300 is where you'll find muddiness. 500, that's kind of a de facto low-mid frequency right there. 1K, 2K, this is kind of your traditional mid-range. 4K, this is where we get into a little vocal clarity. 8K is where we start to get a little bit of presence. And then 16K is where we're really just going to add things like shimmer and just sort of overall lift. Give it a high frequency facelift, if you will. But this is 10 bands. So you can see you don't have a lot of, if you've got something that falls kind of outside of those ranges, this one might be a little aggressive, which is why we have the 30 band and the 20 band. And you can see it's the same thing here, just with smaller increments. So instead of just having 1K, 2K, 4K, 8K, now we have 1K, 1.25K, 1.6, 2, 2.5, 3.2, 4, 5, 6.3. Incidentally, these two right here, 6.3, 5K, this is often where you're going to find the fundamentals of sibilance, right? If you've ever heard those harsh S sounds before, that's where those things are going to sort of fundamentally resonate, 8K, 10K, 12K. Where would cymbals and stuff be? So cymbals, again, there's many different elements. Now, kind of if you want the shimmery, beautiful brightness of a cymbal and you're trying to bring those out more in a mix, you're going to sort of amplify around above 10K. And typically that shimmery feeling, if you're using something like a sizzle, it's actually called a sizzle cymbal. It has these metal rivets in it. I've talked about these on the stream. Or some very kind of bright jazz cymbals. 12K, 14K is going to give you a nice lift there. Now, there's also lots of stuff for different types of cymbals that can happen in the mid-range, and it can get a little tricky there because you can often cloud the frequencies if you've got too much. But brightness of a cymbal is going to happen if you really want that emphasized brightness above 10K. Good morning, Paul Tranny. Very nice to see you. All right. Ooh, I can't even pronounce that one. Okay. All right, cool. Okay. Very nice. Okay, let's see what else you got. I'm just reading some of the comments here before we get started. Okay. By the way, that font was Iskra. Anybody was wondering. Definitely not Comic Sans. Okay, so that's the graphic EQ, and again, we'll kind of talk about this in just a second. Close that up so you can see. And then, as I mentioned, we've got the parametric EQs. And a parametric EQ gives you even more flexibility, the ability to refine frequency very specifically. And here you're looking at 3 different flavors, 3 different variations of a parametric. This is the traditional solid state logic. This is a plugin, a VST3 plugin of mine, one of my favorites, emulating a classic equalization and compressor chain on an SSL console. This is what we would call a 3-band parametric with high and low shelving filters. Additionally, you have the ability here to set the band width. Okay, that's how many adjacent frequencies you're affecting as you boost or cut. You can actually sweep through the frequency bands here, and we'll talk about this. And then you've also got high pass and low pass filtering on here. So you've got your SSL EQ. This is another traditional one. This is a the Red 3, or Red 2 rather, EQ, standard parametric equalizer. Again, you've got your boost and cut gain. You've got your low shelving, low mid, high shelving, high pass, and low pass. This one gives you a little bit more. An overall gain boost. And then you've got sort of preset shapes for your, I should say preset shapes. It's giving you kind of a graphical description of what those bandwidth controls are going to do. So you can see here, this one representing a wider band. And as you move up or increase here, it's going to be a narrow band, meaning that this is affecting many frequencies to the left of right, or left and right. This is affecting only very specific frequencies that you select, okay? And then we have the native parametric EQ, which is very, very good, used on every session of mine. This is a true 5-band parametric with high and low shelving and high pass and low pass filtering. So this one can do everything that all the other ones can do. It's just not as pretty. You know, it doesn't have to be to sound great. This one actually happens to sound great. And I will talk a lot about this and again showcase a lot of the different presets that we have in here. Okay, and then we've got the notch filter here. And as I mentioned, notch filtering, you don't really use this too much today. Maybe some people do. I do a lot of removal of hum and low-end harmonics. And if you look at the presets here, this will give you an idea of the kinds of things that you would often use notch filtering for. Again, you're typically trying to remove some kind of consistent sonic annoyance, whether it's something like that. You can see you can actually pull out, chords or removing different types of low-end harmonics and things. This can also be used for effect to create different types of sounds. So this one, cool, traditional, not used so heavily for me personally, but we're going to cover it anyway. All right, waves it all. Big Chut Beaks, nice to see you. Thank you very much for that. It's being squished down by my headphones today, but thank you. Okay, so in any case, as I take a sip of my vat of coffee, as always, this is a fairly comprehensive look at these things, so hold on to your seats here. It's going to get a little heavy at first, but as we start to break things down, you'll start to understand them more and more. Okay, so we're going to start by first, let me just remove all of these. Would you ever place 7 EQs on a track? Lord, I hope not. Please don't do that. Very, very little reason to need to do that. Not that you can't use more than one. You absolutely can, and sometimes 2 is pretty standard, but yeah, you don't want to stack like multiple EQs. Basically, you can you should probably choose the EQ that's going to help you get the job done the fastest. That's kind of the key. So let's start by using the graphic equalizer, and we'll use the graphic equalizer on a pre-mixed track to kind of give you an idea of what it might sound like. So the first thing I'm going to do here, this is yet again the multi-track master session of one of my songs called I've Got a Bald Spot. And this is not mixed. I mean, this is the mix, but I've removed all the effects and things for the purpose of today. And let's just do a really quick music mix down here so that we have something to play with. All right, so let me just take a listen to this. Now the balances are a little off. That's okay. Just going to kind of try and even these out a little bit for you. nice and dry. Okay, so I'm just going to make a time selection here. A minute in length, that's enough. Let's go and do a quick export on this. And I'm just going to bring this into the editing view so we can play around with the graphic EQ on this. Okay, let me just see where this is going. I'm actually going to stick this on the desktop. Okay. I will click OK on that and let it go. Femi voir, how are you? Very nice to see you. Theater Geek. Oh, yes, well, you know, the thing is, and as I've said many times, Theater Geek was just saying I make audition look easy. You know, like anything, it's very daunting and confusing at first. But once you kind of know just a little, some of the classic techniques and things to sort of start working, it gets easier, right? And hopefully EQ will be that same thing today when we start talking about that. Okay, so here's the mix we just did. All right. So a little clean piano, drums, and bass mix, all dry. Okay. So what I'm going to do is now, as always, there's two different ways to apply effects. In the waveform editor here, this is a destructive view, but you don't have to destructively apply the things all the time. In fact, we have the effects rack here, and you may dock this wherever you want in your application, where you can stack multiple effects and then apply those effects only after you're fully satisfied. So you don't have to like apply an effect, listen to it and go, ah, crap, and then undo it. You can actually just stack them in real time in the waveform view, but they have to be applied at some point if you're going to use them outside of this view. And we talk about that in the Audio 101 lesson about editing. Okay. So let's start by grabbing the 10-band graphic equalizer. Okay. So as I mentioned, 10 bands. So we've got a limited amount of flexibility here, a limited amount of functionality. One thing that you should find, one thing that you should probably consider doing whenever you start with an EQ is zero it out. Now, some of our EQs actually have a preset called full reset. That's what I was looking for here. I don't see it in this one. I believe we do have it actually, though, in the parametric equalizer. Yeah, it's here. So lesson 1 of beginning equalization, reset everything to 0. Don't start with stuff already in place. Bad idea. That's going to basically put a filter over your ears, and now you're not hearing what you think is the original signal. So you really want to start flat, clean, and dry so that you don't hear anything but the sound going through this with nothing done to it. And if we play this back with the effect on right now. Okay. All right. So we're going to start by maybe pulling out a little bit. It's a little muddy, right? Now, let me pull this up too. I made a graphic a couple of years ago, or I should say I made a PDF. For one of my classes at Adobe Max, and actually I distributed this last year too, with some key frequencies to remember. Now, this is, again, these are just kind of suggested ranges. These things can vary, but this will kind of give you a good baseline for where to expect certain sounds. Okay, so bass and bassiness, right? I mentioned 63 hertz is kind of the fundamental for kick drums, right? That initial kick, the fundamental is usually around 60 to 60. Why 63, you say? Just look at it. And you can look at it in the frequency display, also in our real-time frequency analysis. So just figure 60 to 80 hertz is where you're going to often find that attack of the kick. Also, bass guitar, a lot of bass notes you're going to find in that range too, which is yet another reason why when equalizing kick and bass together, it's very important to leave some space. Now you might ask yourself, how do you leave space if they both occupy the same frequency space? Well, this is where we start carving things out, letting certain things pass through, letting other things kind of augment, because you don't necessarily need all those frequencies from all those instruments that share the same frequency playing at the same time. And that's sort of the art of equalization in general, which is you have to get, oh, what's happening here? You have to get you have to get creative. Hold on, sorry, my iPad is. Oh, what just happened here? You have to get creative with how you leverage EQ if you're going to have something that's going to sound balanced, right? It's very easy to make something sound like a bit of a mess, but you really have to carve out space. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So bass and bassiness, 63, 72, 80 hertz. Plosives. This is the popping P's that you will often get on a microphone, particularly condenser microphones, especially if you don't have a pop filter and you're not used to speaking on mic. So often you will find the fundamental, it's a range, but you will often find that initial burst of air starting at around 50, okay? And it can really be anywhere between like 50. You don't really see it up to 100, but that fundamental is going to be somewhere between 50 and 100. Muddiness. Mentioned this before. Now this is, I would even go a little bit lower on this, as I said, even maybe as low as 170 hertz to 250. Maybe even as high as 300, although at 300 hertz, it's a little bit different. I used to do a lot of ear training when I was in college, and I was very good at hearing a frequency and identifying it. And for engineers who do this all the time, you say, how do you hear the difference between 200 and 315? You do, when you study that as an audio nerd. The realities are that when someone says, it just sounds not very clear and just kind of muffled and muddy, 170 to 250, that's where that exists. I've seen a lot of tutorials where they say muddiness is in the 400, 500 range. That's just wrong. That is incorrect. That's not mud. That is a different type of low frequency lack of clarity. It's not mud. So if you see that, if you hear that, they're incorrect. Sorry. Sucks to be them. Mid-range. 900 to 2.2K. Now again, people could argue that the mid-range goes a little lower, goes a little bit higher. This is kind of your traditional musical mid-range, 900 to 2.2K. Presence and lift. Now Michael and I talked about this on our stream last week at the Twitch takeover for Creative Jam. I often refer to the 4K range as the Beatles' rubber soul EQ. And remember I was just talking about that little sort of upper mid-range boost of records. If you add a little boost, an EQ boost at around 4K, 4.5K, 4,500 hertz, you're going to hear kind of the vocal clarity kind of just pop a little bit, right? Assuming they're mixed well to begin with. The voices are just going to kind of edge out a little bit more. So presence and lift, you could even say 3,500 to 4,500, maybe even as high as 5K. All right. Again, these are ranges. I went kind of aggressive on this list here, but I was really referencing vocals specifically, I think, at the time. Sibilance, again, those harsh S sounds when you hear things actually start to distort and get pretty nasty. 5.6 to 6.3K. That's a fundamental. It can always be a little bit lower, but when you're trying to de-S something, that's generally the range that you're trying to do. If you were going to sidechain a compressor to compress down sibilant signals, that's the range you want to be looking at. Presence, around 8K. Now, 8K can get a little scary because things can start to get a little bit brittle sounding. You can start to boost 8K and suddenly things they sound almost glassy, like it's almost cutting. But this is where you're going to add a little bit of presence. And this is if you've got, again, vocals, cymbals, think of stringed instruments like beautifully strung lutes or acoustic guitar. If you give a little bit of boost at 8K, that's going to give you a little bit more presence. You're really going to feel the string a bit more in that range. And it's going to be bright, but it's going to be a nice bright, but you have to be careful. And then, as I mentioned before, shimmer, right? And sizzle. And this generally occurs above 12K. Now, as we get older, we start to lose our ability to really hear much above 16K. And again, this all depends on age and exposure to different elements with your ears. Different people can hear different frequency ranges. But that shimmer, that I can't really describe it any other way except that it's if jazz hands could be translated into sound, that's kind of where the shimmer is. All right, it's up here. It's a lift. You're lifting the gray. All right. And this can be very nice. This can also be overused. And again, too much of that can make things sound very, very brittle, very, very scary. So, what's that? I'm looking at all these. Somehow we're talking a lot about I've got a bald spot. You can check it out on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, YouTube, and anywhere else that music is streamed or sold. This might be unrelated, but is this a good way to digitally apply a limiter to a mic? I'm experiencing a lot of clipping, Femivoir. Yes, I mean, you can apply limiters. Now, again, you can go back to the last episode 9 was actually about limiting. If you're trying to do it on input, to record it with the limiter, you're going to have to introduce that, of course, before it goes to your sound card or whatever. This is not uncommon for broadcasters. I've certainly done it. I've talked about that too here on the stream, that when you're doing voiceover and things, it's perfectly legit to record with compression. In fact, I'd give you extra points, Femivoir, because that's destructive processing. That's committing to it. So it's all about just setting it properly. But yeah, that's totally legit. APOC 1973. Yep, the range is definitely between. Yep, we're agreeing on the muddiness. Yeah, man. It's like I said, I've seen a bunch of tutorials out there, perusing them, like to see what's out there and if I should bother doing any. And these ranges often, they're just miscommunicated. All right. I can say that I learned from, amazing staff, George Martin himself, and, a 9-time Grammy winner, Roger Nichols. So I'm going to go with them. They know what they're talking about, and they're right. And it's all a range anyway, but this is kind of a good starting point, okay? So these are the things that you want to keep in mind. So when we're back in our 10-band EQ here, this is where now you can start to identify what do we want to do. So if we start listening, and if we wanted to bring up more of that kick drum, let's start with around 63. And if I pull up the frequency analysis here, let's go into a slightly tighter range. See, if we pull it all out, we've lost our kick drum, right? Let's bring it back in gradually. Now, what you're also noticing, of course, is that things are getting a little muddy, right? They're getting a little bit too dark, a little bit too bassy. That's because as you increase this 63 hertz, and this is where the graphic equalizer doesn't help you visually to understand what's going on, you're also starting to affect 80, 40, 100, 20. You're starting to bring up other frequencies around it, okay? So ultimately, you're just kind of overextended. You don't have enough detail here. Now, if you use this subtly, we're also at 12.5 dB. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing that in this situation. Sometimes you do need that much. So again, you just don't have enough sort of individual control here. And you can be careful to just increase 63 and maybe drop 80 or maybe drop 100. This is where having more bands gives you more flexibility, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. Similarly, if we're doing that, so maybe 5.5 is okay, but now it's sounding a little muddy. Okay, well, we don't have a 200, but we've got a 250. You can kind of hear that. Oh, look at that. Now we suddenly brought back some of the clarity there. All right. So here's no EQ. Here it is with the EQ. Let's bring in some mid-range. Hear what that sounds like? 1K? We don't want too much of that. This is where you'll often pull that down. Okay. 4K? Okay. 8K? And if you're watching the real-time frequency analysis here, you can really better start to see what's going on. So anyway, as I'm kind of migrating through this, are you getting the idea what's happening? So you have a limited amount of frequencies to play with, all right? Not a lot of control here. It's easy, it's fast, quick sliders. Can you do most things with a 10-band graphic equalizer? I mean, I think you can do a fairly decent type of EQ. You just don't have a lot of control here, right? So this is sort of a good way to start to understand what's happening, right? And then you'll notice, by the way, that we also have this sort of master gain, because oftentimes as you're attenuating cutting, sometimes you want to add some gain back in. Similarly, if you're boosting too much, maybe your signal's getting a little hot, you can also pull down the master after the EQ has occurred on here, okay? So this is kind of a good idea, a good way to sort of get started. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't really showcase to you what's happening as you increase these sliders. All right? Hey, Jinkus, what's up? All right. Just reading back here. Yep. APOC, I'm always using parametric EQ. Main issue is that you're always over tweaking. Yes, and it's not hard to do, right? Now, that's something else to point out while we're here. When applying equalization, when doing any EQ, and this really should have been the first thing I said, you have to have a good listening environment, which would mean good speakers, which would mean speakers meant to be equalized with, and or very good headphones that you really know the sound of, and a reference that you can listen to kind of, flatten out your mind, flatten out your ears. What does all that mean? Well, again, I'm not saying you have to have $1,000 studio monitors to mix. That absolutely not. You can do it on, in fact, even better if you mix them on cheap, crummy speakers, because typically if it sounds good on a cheap, crummy speaker, it's probably going to sound even better on really good speakers. And this is something that every studio in the world does when they mix an album. You always have, you've heard me say this before, you always have multiple sets of speakers. You have the very big, right? The ones that just look good and they're big and they're loud and they're bassy. And then you have what are often known as the kind of flat mid-range. These are also, or often, the Yamaha NS10Ms. Classic, traditional, they're black and white. You've seen them probably if you've ever seen pictures of various studios. Almost every studio in the world still has these things. They're just a standard. They don't sound good. Actually, they sound crummy. They sound flat and lifeless. The point being, if you mix something and it sounds, albeit flat and lifeless, but balanced on those, it's probably going to sound good anywhere. And then you will often have like a mono playout speaker, or just kind of, even today, I've seen, in fact, when I did my session about a year ago at another studio outside of where I live, they even had like multimedia type speakers for testing, right? Because a lot of people listen to music, listen to audio on those desktop, stick it in your 1/8-inch mini jack kind of thing. So you kind of reference on those. You don't want to mix on those per se, but you reference your mix on those. So you got to have a good listening environment. You've got to have something good to listen to, and you need to know, really, before you get started, sort of what is balanced, what is sort of what's like nothing, what's just flat. And then if I over accentuate things, I always hear from people, how come my mixers are too bassy, right? Or how come my mixers are too bright? Or how come they're too mid-rangey? And 9 times out of 10, it's because the way that you're listening is over accentuating that. I've talked about headphones, right? So I use these. These are Sony MDR 7506. These are industry standards. Now I've got more expensive headphones that are better sounding, but I know the sounds of these, and I know them so well that I can mix on them, and I know that what I mix on here, how it's going to sound everywhere else. Similarly, sometimes I have to use earbuds, which I recommend not using, but once you get familiar with the sound, you can kind of mix to them to know their limitations so that you don't over accentuate things. Having said that, I've got a lot of people that I've talked to over the years who mix on things like Beats headphones. Now, Beats headphones are great for listening. They're great. By design, they're bassier. So if you're mixing, if you're EQing something that is already bassy, how do you know if you're actually overdoing it or not doing enough? You probably won't. So, at least from the start, until you really know the sound of them. So you really want something that's very kind of flat without any additional color to it, right? It should just sound very even before you begin applying equalization, okay? So, I'm just looking here. Femivoir. Oh, yes, you have them. They're amazing and really economical. That's it. I mean, they're, it's 100, 80 some euros or whatever, $100 US, and they're just, it's not inexpensive, but it's worth it. And if you want your mixes to sound good, this is where you should invest some of that. And there are many others that mimic these same kinds of sounds. JK Digi saying, "Yep, the big ones are just there to impress the clients." That is absolutely 100% true. Make no mistake about it. Books are judged by their covers, and that includes studios and kit and everything else. Part of the reason why the studio industry died is because everybody was trying to do this And at some point, once digital really became the standard, when you had people recording the same quality stuff in their home studios, and I mean artists, and they didn't want to, because it used to be the artist would pay for all the studio time, right? So they'd get an advance back when those days happened. And, half of that advance would go to the studio time. And they're like, oh, I can do it at home? Oh, it's as clean, it sounds the same because they have good mics and whatever. Oh, right, I don't need you. And then you'd have producers going, but this is the most expensive machine in the entire hospital, right? Stupid. It's just, that's the way it was. That's still the way it can be, but, it doesn't really matter. So you're absolutely right, JK. All right. HS8 served me well. Yep. So I see there. So yeah, Technoscope saying good listening, good monitoring, not an ideal room. So again, sometimes you've got to treat it, and you can see bits and pieces of my. Still, this room is temporary, so there's like all this sound treating stuff along the walls, and it's along the sides here that you can't see. And I've controlled it. I've treated it enough so I can mix in this room. It's still a little reverberant in here. But again, I know what that is, so I know what to listen for and what not to accentuate or to attenuate. So, hello. Hey, Paulina. I thought I did say hello. Sorry about that. Okay. So, okay. Elsie Finch is still drinking when I say 4K. Very good. All right. Okay. Wise words. It's kapow. Very good. IORE, is it possible to compensate with EQ in PC audio controls for headphones that reproduce frequencies slightly unevenly? I heard that all non-studio headphones have certain frequencies accentuated on purpose. So here's the thing. That's a great question, IORE, before we move on further. I would not recommend using in PC DSP, digital signal processing, to do anything to your listening. For the simple fact that if it's like, OS based, hey, use this Windows equalizer. I mean, it's those algorithms and things that they use to create those things. In fact, I was having a chat with a colleague about this just recently. They're not sort of studio level, right? They're just not, and they will probably do more damage. Not to say that if you've got super bassy headphones and you use something in Windows or Mac to kind of, EQ out some of the bass, I mean, it could help, but ultimately those filters, and are they running in sort of in 16-bit, 24-bit? Like, you don't know what's happening to the sound in that EQ. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about sort of dithering and things in this lesson today, but there's a lot that goes on with digital signal processing. So I would recommend against that. And part of that too, and this is not to say that people have to invest more, it's just a reality, your onboard sound, right? Your onboard sound for laptops, for desktop machines, the sound card that's built in to a MacBook Pro, to an HP, or a Dell Inspiron or whatever, or even a tower system, whatever it is, including the Mac trash can and, Dell and HP towers and the like. The onboard sound it's not great. It's not meant to be like, hey, Abbey Road is replacing all of their gear with this. No, that's why they have external sound devices. So a lot of times it's the output of the machine that's coloring the sound. So you've already got your output is already feeding colored sound to your headphones. Now you're adding an effect on top of that. You can see where the problem lies. So, I would say, again, if that's an issue, you could try it. It's probably going to have diminishing returns, although you can also learn the sound, right? So it's not an absolute. It wouldn't be most recommended. Typically, I would say if you're having those kinds of issues, for the same $100 approximately that I bought these headphones for, and you can too, you can find an external USB, Thunderbolt, Firewire, even sound device that does 24-bit analog to digital input and output, and it's just going to be cleaner and a little bit better. And that's very important for EQ too. Now, as you said, a lot of headphones out there, Beats specifically, have accentuated bass. These are sort of classically known to be flat, right? They're actually a little bright, to be honest, but flat enough so that you're not going to overdo they'll sound pretty harsh pretty fast, which is telling you that's good because they're reacting to the frequencies in question. So again, it's kind of just there's a whole chain in this kind of audio domain that's going to affect ultimately what comes out of here. So you really want the cleanest output possible. And sadly, I mean, even for, I use MacBook Pros and I've got my HP down here. Which one is this? Oh yeah, the Elite Book. I mean, the onboard sound, it's not good, It's okay. I had to mix some stuff with it. Last week on stream, I was mixing some of the sound design with earbuds. Don't recommend that to anybody. But I had to. I had no choice. But I know the sound of the earbuds, and I know what that onboard sound card is like. So I didn't overdo, I was careful with the high end, and I didn't try and overdo the low end because there's just not a lot in there. All right? So hopefully that answers that. All right? Mixing on beats is why a lot of underground hip-hop sounds a little off. Yeah, I mean, again, that can be by design, But if you're starting and if you're trying to do really just sort of basic things, you're going to put them on and things are going to sound warmer and bassier without even doing anything. And that will ultimately, that's not what you want, okay? All right. The iPhones go bing. Yes. All right. 7506 BK Duck. All right. Top Knob. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Glad you're enjoying that. All right. Got a receiver plugged into my graphics card. Dan I/O. Yep. See, now that, and I assume you mean into your internal I/O, and even that is kind of one more stage where you could possibly, if it's analog connections, obviously introducing a little bit more noise, a little bit more colorization. So you just have to be careful, all right? Top Knob. After your compression lesson, my tracks sound 100% better. Oh, hey, thank you very much. Very glad to hear it. Yep, glad they were free. Way too basic. Is noise canceling a feature to avoid for mixing? So yeah, that's a great question too, and we need to play more in this pack. We've only got 18 more minutes. We talk so much here. There's so much to talk about. I have barely shown you any EQ. I played one thing. The short answer, yes. Do not mix with at least starting out. Don't start out with noise canceling because again, that absolutely 100% by design, certain frequencies are compromised. That's right. You're canceling out certain things so that you don't hear background noise. You're throwing stuff away. So that would not be a starting point for me. All right. So let's take a listen just now quickly to this graphic 30 band. And all I wanted to point out here was that now because you've got more control with smaller bands, you can really refine what it is that you're doing. And you're seeing here that I'm just increasing. Let's get a little bit of 8. A little bit of shimmer here. So, here's before. Years after. Maybe give it a little bit more around 1K. Before. After. Now it's very subtle here. You're also hearing my mic. I'm not muting this. You get the idea though, okay? So this is graphic. Now, to be honest with you, I never use graphic equalizers because I want to be able to sweep through the frequencies to find exactly where the problem areas are. And this is a common term to find just that. You sweep through. What does it mean to sweep through the frequency bands? I'm going to show you that now. And to do that, you're going to want to use the parametric equalizer. Now, this is the one that you're probably going to use most of the time. This is certainly, largely really the most useful because you just have the most control. And this one gives you a whole series of things that can be useful for various different reasons, for both affecting and just for sort of like repairing and tweaking. All right. So now again, here we know that we want to kind of accentuate some of the kick drum. But I want to be careful really just to affect that kind of 63 hertz range. So here we have 1 through 5. Okay, this is a 5-band parametric. So if I enable band number 1, I can dial in specifically the frequency that I want. Or, as I mentioned before, if I'm trying to find out where is that fundamental, where do I really feel the of the kick drum? Maybe it's 70. Remember, it's often a range. What I can do is I can sweep through the frequency band. So to do that, we have to first increase the gain, but also pay attention to the Q, or the width. So if I simply increase 63 Hertz, what I love about the parametric is, again, this is going to give you a visual. And since we are here on the Creative channel on Adobe, visual is key, right? To be able to see what you're talking about, to understand, is really a great way to learn equalization. You can see all the parameters here. I'm just going to scoot that up. Okay. So your bandwidth, your Q value here, again, determines how many of the adjacent frequencies you'll be boosting or cutting. Now, if you want to just increase the attack of the kick drum, or that thwap of the snare, or maybe just pull out a little bit of that, weird mid-range ring, or a little bit of sibilance, you don't want to use a wide band. You don't want to affect all these frequencies over here and all these frequencies over here. You really want to keep it refined to just a very small range. So to do that, we're going to increase this value, and I can simply scrub it left or right. And you can see here with a Q of, say, 12, that's what we would refer to as a very narrow bandwidth. And as we make this wider, this is a very wide bandwidth, okay? Affecting a lot of frequencies to the left and right, affecting really only only those specific frequencies, or the center frequency, which is what this is often referred to as inside of a parametric EQ. So we're going to use a Q value. For kick drum, I'll often use a Q value of around 8. Now, again, we already kind of know where this is, but I'm going to show you here how we sweep through. And all that you have to do there, this is 18 dB, that might be a lot, is we're just going to start playing back. All right. Now you might say, Jason, are you going to take off? Because that sounds like, one of the... That sounds like one of the every royalty-free track in the Twitch royalty-free playlist, which is that. Right, they have that. That is, by the way, typically done with a high pass or low pass filter, depending upon which direction they're going. But the filter sweep is the same thing. So what you're listening for is you're trying to listen to where that fundamental of the kick drum is really accentuated. Now at 63, that's a little too low. It's kind of flubby. Let's put our frequency analysis back here, which seemingly sometimes not full real time. Not happy about that. Let's get that. Anyone from the audition team here watching? Let's take a look at why that isn't always real time. Let's do that. It's right around 71 Hertz is where we want to be. So, similarly, now that we've swept to find that frequency, we can also pull it out, right? Now you still hear the bass guitar in there. It's just not as present. But now, okay? Now we can really just increase the kick drum there, okay? And now 10 dB is a lot, so we'll probably go to around 6 or so, and that's enough, okay? Similarly, let's start controlling some of that muddiness in there, all right? So let's go to around 200. Now for this, keep this not quite, maybe a Q value of 2. All right? You can hear just very unpleasant, right? It sounds muffled. Okay, there's 266. There's 300. Now, as I said, this is kind of the edge of muddiness. Not to say that 400 and 500 don't have their own characteristic sound. Just have to pick a section where there's nothing happening. But that's not mud. Okay, and here it seems like right around 260 at this Q value is really where I was seeing things were going into the red. And you're almost hearing it distorting. You actually want to listen for things kind of distorting or you'll hear them kind of digitally overmodulate. That's telling you that you're in the right place. So if we start pulling this out, go around 4. And now you'll notice the bass guitar and the kick drum also sound a little cleaner, a little clearer, because we've scooped out some of that mud that was living in this range. Remember, there's a lot of frequency content from bass guitar, from regular guitar, from vocals, from piano. That's in 260. That's, the 260 hertz range isn't bad. It's just that if you've got too much going on in there, if too much sound is occupying that range, it's just going to sound really good. That's all that's going to happen. So that's what you're trying to do. You're scooping it out. And that's why I love the parametric, not only for its sound, but as a visual teaching tool, because you can really see what you're doing. You're scooping out space, and that is the essence of equalization. You have to scoop out space. Now, this is a mixed track, right? So there's only limited things we can do here. That's part of the brilliance of mastering. And that perhaps will be another Audio 101 for a future date, is mastering EQ, right? When you have a finished track, you can't make the bass softer per se. It's too loud, but you want to attenuate certain frequencies without affecting other like frequencies. It's an art form. It's very difficult, and you have to be very careful to kind of boost and cut appropriately. All right, now hold on. I'm just going to go look at a couple of the comments here. All right. Okay. Oh, yes. All right. Sony is noise canceling. Yeah, okay, I'm going back to there. All right. And the Finch cover, My Heart Will Go On. Supersonic sibilant sound. Super. Okay. A Beetlejuice soundboard. Very nice. Okay. Fade up that EQ. Okay, there you go. Excellent. How much do I Okay. Very cool. All right, so the question APOC just had was, how much of this do you recommend on individual instruments? As much as required. Now, that's an excellent question because, in fact, Michael and I was saying this to Michael. It used to be, particularly in the studio when I used to own studios, microphone technique is another thing. Part of, you don't really want to have to equalize a lot. It's actually beneficial to you to record stuff and mic it properly so that when you hear it back, it's like, oh, okay, just a little bit more bass, just make it a little bit thicker, maybe a little bit more shimmer presence at the top. Mid-range up or down a little, just kind of depends, and maybe if there's vocals, boost it 4K, if there's, electric piano, give it a boost around 1 or 2.5K. So you ultimately don't want to have to do a lot, because then in mastering, it makes their job easier too. But absolutely, if you're recording stuff and individually the instruments need help, absolutely take care of them in the mix before you mix it down, before you combine it into mono or stereo, because then you just have less flexibility. And that ultimately is really where, the technique and the art of equalization comes into play. All right. So you get the idea here. I don't have to go through every single band here. You understand how these are working. What I do want to show you here, just one more thing, is, and this is something which we have just natively in the parametric EQ, are the high pass. High pass also means low cut, right? You're allowing high frequencies to pass through, and you're cutting everything below a particular frequency with a particular gain range, okay? So let's say, and this is very commonly done on things like vocal or maybe bass guitar. So let me go ahead and pull up the bass track here. Now remember, we talked about the bass guitar being in kind of the same range as the kick drum. So a common technique, now there's a lot of ways to do this. I'm not saying you should do this. I'm just saying this is one common technique, is that if you've got a bass guitar that is very bassy, I know that sounds silly, it's not. If you actually have, different instruments will sound characteristically more woody or hollow or thicker. Some things sound thinner. If you've got new strings, it can sound very bright and very aggressive, but maybe not a lot of very sort of subsonic low-end range. Oftentimes, to make room for a bass guitar, or rather, let me rephrase that. To make room for the bass, you will leave all the present frequencies in the kick drum and roll off a little of those sort of subsonic low-end frequencies from the bass guitar. And you might think, well, but then you're not going to get that from the bass. No, you'll get some. The kick drum will kind of mask the rest, but you're trying to make space. Think of it this way. Bass and bass drum are like this. They're on top of one another. So if you say, all right, let's just roll off some of those subsonics on the bass, all the note fundamentals are still there, but now you've got the subsonic boom of the kick drum kicking through, and just the note values of the bass kicking through after that. It may seem strange, you just have to try it and listen, but this is a good way to kind of free up some space. So one way to do that is to use a high-pass filter, okay? So if we take a listen here. Now this is a very, well-recorded, this is my Rickenbacker, recorded through an amp, Fender Bassman here. So, but, and you can see kind of where it's mostly resonating here, right? There's a lot of stuff over 100 hertz, okay? Right, and that's a low E right there. But there's still some stuff going on in this 50, 60, right at the edge of 70 right here. So that might get in the way. That might make the kick drum less effective, right? Or it might force me to have to compress it more to make it punch through the mix more. So if I apply a high-pass filter to this, now, how aggressively that high-pass filter reacts against the instrument is by this number of decibels per octave. So we're allowing it to pass through at 24 dB, or say 36 dB per octave, or say 48 dB per octave. And you can see that curve gets more and more aggressive. It's almost like cutting it off completely. And as we sweep through this, I'm just going to go to 100 here. Take a look at the frequency graph. Do you see how now everything is sloping down like that? The bass still sounds super bassy and present and thumpy. That's partly the guitar itself. Here it is without. Here it is with. Now, again, that's too much. I wouldn't go up to 100, right? I'd probably go to around 70, but that gives you an idea. So even at, say, 73, here's without. Without it, there's just a lot of unnecessary sort of low-end thickness. With. And we've just scooped out a little space here for the kick drum, all right? Now, you might have notes that are in the 70 hertz range. You're thinking, you're killing them at 48 dB per octave. You just have to listen to it. And I can tell you that for a lot of cases, and the Rickenbacker happens to be very thick, super bassy, and thumpy. That's one of the classic sounds of the Rick. Thump, thump, thump. It's just the way it sounds. So you're always going to have that attack that you desire, but you're leaving some space. And this is kind of a technique that I'll use a lot, depending upon the type of music and if I'm just trying to make a little bit more space, and also determined by how busy the bass line is. This is playing sort of root 5. It's very sort of simple, and it's a slow tune, or a mid-tempo groove rather. There's not a lot of sustain. These are the only notes that are sustained, I think, in the whole track. But everything else is do do. So, you can, again, there's already some space in the way that I'm playing. If I'm going which sometimes I do. In fact, here, wait a minute, I'll give you a perfect example. I even have it right here. So this is another piece. This is 100. This is a bit faster. Now, you can even hear this right now. It sounds kind of a little muddy. And I'm also using this native guitar suite, which I'm shocked. Okay? So the speed of the bass, the speed of the performance can also determine how much equalization you're keeping or rolling off based on how much space you're trying to free up. Did Jason just freestyle Cotton Eye Joe? That's hilarious. All right. Cool. That bass is taking a walk. Damn right. Damn right, damn right. Damn hand gestures, though. Okay. All right. Very cool. Okay. Sorry, just reading back through. Which frequencies do human voices usually fall into? Yes, full step. So yes, I mentioned that before. So again, kind of your fundamentals, the notes of the fundamentals can be as low as 60 or 100 hertz. But where you're going to find vocals when you're trying to EQ voice and bring out presence in a voice, you're going to look for you want to pay attention to 1K, 2K, 4K for a bit of presence, 8K for a bit more of clarity, 12K for shimmer, 250 for mud here, and I'll just pull this up again real quickly. And this is kind of a good idea. This is related to voice and everything. Pull this back up for you here so you can see it for just a second. Okay, and these are just suggested ranges. They're not absolute. The only absolute thing I am very, very particular about is that muddiness does not occur at 400 hertz. I've heard that a lot, and that really bugs me because it's wrong. It's incorrect. Okay. So why don't we do that actually? Let's go to a voice. Voice is kind of hard to say sometimes. So this is a voiceover. Now this is me doing the Creativity 360 voiceover. Is there a link to that? Full stop. Actually, no. That used to be available. I may have done a blog. And you know what? I take that back. There might be. If you go to my blog, buddhajewmusic.com, and type in Max, M-A-X, there's a blog post where I blogged about going to Adobe Max, and I believe I even posted that voiceover recording guide in there. And perhaps one of the mods can put my my link to, here, I can just do it. I'll type it in here for you. It's buddhajewmusic.com. Okay? And just search on Max, and I believe you'll find a post where I actually have that document. And if not, it's here on the VOD. Okay.
Photoshop Hall of Fame award winner Corey Barker will be creating incredible images and effects with Photoshop.
Okay. So, excuse me, this was a live vocal. There's a live belch for you right there.
Illustrator Sophie Roach will...
Okay. These are very loud, too. Now, these aren't even processed. This is just me recording on mic. As I've said before, I do this a lot, so you can see the dynamics are very even. I don't even use a pop filter because I know how to record myself on this. I speak on mic all the time. So, but that doesn't mean this doesn't need EQ.
See how Synapse comes up with stunning motion graphics.
All right. So if we come into our filter and EQ parametric here. All right, let's reset it again. Again, best practice, always reset. Now I'm just going to mute my mic for a second so you can really hear what I'm doing, but I'm going to focus on, there's a little bit of that room ambience in there, again, because this room's a little echoey. So I'm going to try and remove some of the room, and that's going to be in that mid-range of somewhere between 1K and maybe 2500 hertz approximately. Probably going to give it a little bit of a boost, somewhere between 3.5 and 4K and maybe 8K, and maybe accentuate some of my low end, because there's a lot of low end in my voice, which I also tend to roll off a lot of if there's a lot of music accompanying me. All right, I've even got the bass roll off on this mic as I broadcast. Right, this mic has a built-in roll off at 80 hertz. Okay, and I do that on purpose because I don't want to need this to be like super bassy. Plus, because I'm also kind of moving around a lot, so having that extra bass in there makes it sound a bit more uneven when broadcasting. Okay, so I'm just going to mute this for a second and start EQing and playing around with this. Take a listen. All right, I'm just going to be silent for a second. Technoscope. This is an AT4050 multi-pattern condenser. AT Audio-Technica 4050. But yes, Finch is correct. I do recommend the AT2020 for people to use. It's a single pattern condenser. So this has what is known as cardioid, figure 8, and omni, different polar patterns. By the way, that info is also in that document if you want to understand the various microphone polar patterns. That's in this doc as well. So again, this microphone has omni, cardioid, and figure 8 isn't even in there. Oh yeah, bidirectional. Here it is. Okay. So figure 8 means that you can have people on both sides of the mic, and the pickup works in the same way. It'll pick up sound from both sides. But the 2020 is just cardioid, which is this. But that's good because it has good rear sound rejection, very clean, etc. Okay, so let me mute this for a second. EQ the voice.
For a video stinger. Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at twitch.tv/Adobe. See how Synapse comes up with stunning motion graphics for a video stinger. Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at twitch.tv. Other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at twitch.tv/Adobe. Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at twitch.tv/Adobe. Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th, 27th, and 28th, only at twitch.tv/Adobe.
Okay, so you can hear there, if we just take a listen to the before.
Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests.
And the after.
Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360.
Again, before.
Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests.
You can hear it sounds a little echoey, it sounds a little hollow, right? And then when we kick the EQ in, now it's just more present. It's a little brighter, there's a little more clarity, there's a little bit more warmth to my bass. And I used here what you heard me say at the very beginning, a high shelving filter. And you can actually see the graphic. Now there's two different methods of shelving here. This is the default. And that literally means that you're going to set that frequency, and you can see it kind of ramps up like that. And that means everything above that frequency increase by X number of dB, as if it's sitting on the shelf, and then you raise the shelf or cut the shelf. So it's everything below or above, all right? That's why they're at the beginning and the end of the spectrum, okay? So I'm shelving everything else. So that means 7K, 7800 hertz, 8K, 9K, 10K, 24K, whatever. I'm increasing those there just to give it a lift, right? Rather than just kind of boosting an individual frequency, I'm just lifting everything, and not by too much. There wasn't a great amount there. Maybe 6 is a little bit hot, but you get the idea. And it just really gives an overall lift and a much more pleasant sound.
Follow us on Twitch and learn from these masters and other special guests at the first Creativity 360 on April 26th.
Okay, so this is, again, the parametric, really, this is your friend, and this is the one where you want to do most of your work in. Now, I know we're about 8 minutes over, but I always go about 15 minutes over on these Audio 101s. So I'm going to show you a couple more things here. Femivoir says you've got a Blue Yeti. Does that even compare with AT? Or is the Blue Yeti the Beats of microphones? So Femivoir, so Blue Yeti is very popular. No, it is not the Beats of microphones, although it's definitely meant to be a more general purpose kind of mic. Now, as I've said many times before, maybe you haven't heard it here, this will be my first Harry Potter reference of the day. The microphone chooses the voiceover artist, Harry, or Femivoir. The wand chooses the wizard. So ultimately, even the same two microphones may sound different on someone's voice, and certainly the way I sound on the Blue Yeti will sound different than you do. So it really depends, and that's why I often say to people, and I know it doesn't work this way. It's not like in the past, you walk into a store, you try it out, you buy it, you go to Amazon, it's a good deal, you buy it, and hope that it sounds good. It just depends. Now, a lot of things that can also help, if you find that the problem that I tend to hear with a lot of those mics is that they're like too bright or too brittle or too bassy. It's always one or the other. You never hear, it's too mid-rangey. Not so much. Too brittle or too bassy. So a lot of that can also be controlled just by changing your environment, right? If you're in an echoey room with a very bright mic, it's going to accentuate that tenfold. So common thing to do. You don't have soundproofing. You're not going to spend money on that. Cover your walls with sheets, and not something super thin, thick enough to actually sort of, reject sound bouncing off of it. Towels. When you're doing a voiceover or a recording, I do this all the time. Here, I'll show you. Not even kidding. So I have roaming because I don't have my ISO booth where I am today. All right. This is by the way, this is classic Sonix. This is I bought this in the 80s. All right. So we can make a little hood right here now, and you can just see that even that has dramatically changed the sound characteristic. Now you might think, dude, that's weird. Are you playing hide and seek? Yeah. But you notice it's a lot less reverberant. It's a little cleaner, a little thicker, versus this, right? Now, I like this, and I know how to treat this room to make it sound good. But again, just by kind of, whoops, there go my headphones. Just by changing how you record on mic can change the sound, and that can help. Now, if you're on stream, you're probably not going to do that. But also, you can still treat the walls, treat the room, treat the space around you. And you can certainly get a good, legit sound out of Blue Yeti. I mean, that's why they're so popular, because ultimately they're good, but they're different for everybody. They're going to sound different with everybody. Duck and cover, Ian. All right. That's impressive foam. Yeah, this is the... So you can actually see it's so funny, right? So when I sold one of my studios years ago, little anecdote before we wrap up this, I got to do FFT and notch. I was like, I sold it, and I was happy to sell it, but I had spent a ton of, blood, sweat, and tears treating the rooms and everything, particularly the vocal booth. So I went in and I was like, I bought all that soundproofing. I'm taking it. Look, you can see the glue. Mine! I took it back. That's right. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, and there's and the thing is, that stuff is so cheap today, you can find it. Oh, you're so welcome, Febivore. Okay, so last couple things to show you here. We've seen parametric. Now, you might watch this and go, he didn't teach me a damn thing. I don't know how to EQ. You might think that. I've been throwing all these knowledge nuggets at you, but I'm telling you, when you go into EQ now, start with the graphic if you've never done it. See what it does, okay? Use that little range guide that I showed you there. I'll pull it up again, okay? Use this little range guide and go, all right, yep, I'm looking, I'm trying to see if I can hear these things. That's a good idea too. Pull up a track. Now, modern music is a little difficult sometimes because it's so mixed and so compressed. You really want sort of a raw, unmastered mix to really equalize against. Trying to equalize a finished, mastered mix, again, it's not that you're cheating, they're cheating you because it's already done. It's already been perfected. But in any case, use these ranges, sweep through the frequencies in the parametric as opposed to using the sliders, and you'll find that the graphic is cool for a quick tweak, but it's not enough control. You want more control. So then you'll go into parametric, and then you can sweep through the bands, right? And I'll show you that one last time just to kind of emphasize that. You're trying to find, you saw me actually do it just a second ago. I was trying to find where the room echo was, and it turned out to be right around 1400 I'm using a pretty wide Q value here. I can actually narrow this a little bit more, and you're almost listening for it to whistle, to ring. So take a listen here. I'll do this one more time.
Illustrator Sophie Roach will involve audiences worldwide as she creates one of her beautiful and intricate images. Illustrator Sophie Roach will involve audiences worldwide as she creates one of her beautiful and intricate images. Illustrator Sophie Roach will involve audiences worldwide as she creates one of her beautiful and intricate images. Illustrator Sophie Roach will involve audiences worldwide as she creates one of her beautiful and intricate images. Illustrator Sophie Roach will involve audiences worldwide as she creates...
So at this range... See, now this is a different, you're kind of hearing this like this weird whistle. Yeah, there's like a weird resonance in this room at 2K. Now, I could pull that out. That wasn't necessarily the room resonance that I wanted to remove. The room resonance that I wanted was actually about 1,000 hertz lower. But this is where you can start to identify where these things are. And again, based on this Q value, before I had it at 2, now this is very narrow at 8, you can really identify where those things are. A classic, another use case of this, when you're recording snare drum. A lot of snare drums tend to ring. Now you can fix that after the fact, but if you put an EQ on there and you have them go, you can find exactly where that ring is and knock it out and just get rid of it, okay? And you do that by sweeping. So you sweep through.
It's one of her beautiful and intricate images.
Find it.
See how Synapse comes up with stunning motion graphics.
And then you take it out, okay? Very simply. All right. So let's now go into, for our last couple of minutes here, first FFT filter. All right, now this one is, you might think after all the stuff I just showed you, how are live festivals like Glastonbury EQ'd? They are EQ'd live. Yeah. Live sound, totally different ball of wax, totally different game. And that goes for, live outdoor festivals, live concerts, etc. It's like anything. They do rehearsals, right? They warm up when there's no one in the venue, no one there. They get a certain sound. Outdoor, very different, of course, from an indoor enclosed environment. But then, there's also certain things that to account for when bodies are in the seats, how the EQ changes, right? Think of bodies in the seats as putting carpet on the walls, right? You're adding stuff that's going to deaden those reflections. So there's a lot of things to consider. And then, of course, now I'm the first to say I don't do live sound very much at all. I never did. I did it years and years ago, and nothing gave me more anxiety than doing live sound because I'm a studio engineer. Controlled environments. Very different work doing it live. Not to say you can't do both. Many do. I didn't like it because it was just too much. It was just too much unknown. This was in the 90s too, and it was like a lot of grunge, and I would set everything up, do a live gig. The band would come on, and they would like trash the stage. So the next band would come up, everything was messed up, and I would be freaking out, because nothing was where it was supposed to be. So live sound is again, very different, but it's the techniques are no different, right? The only difference is that you have certain things that that will affect, again, bass. If you've got to send high frequency, think Glastonbury, back however many thousands of yards, you have to account for that. You have to account for that. You have to account for bass and not, you don't want, bass will naturally, because the waveforms are so long, will carry far greater distances than high frequency. But you also don't want to completely drown out the highs. So it's a lot of very careful balancing. Again, they're monitoring live and in headphones, right? They need a quieter environment, right? Speakers in an indoor venue aren't going to help you, right? They're in cans, they're listening. But it's just a different technique. It's just really just a variation on a theme. Yeah. Carpets that have not showered in days have been enjoying proof. All right, Ian's going off on a tangent here. So, very cool. All right, yes, fast Fourier transform math. So that is what FFT stands for, as Femi Voir said. It is for fast Fourier transform. Basically, you've got a series of, you could use, think of this as like broad, high pass, low pass filtering, narrow band pass filtering, and or notch filtering, right? Now, I mentioned notch filtering before because this is your notch filter. Now, I'm just going to show this to you. I don't have any example to play for you right now. It doesn't matter. You can't hear these things anyway. But you can see what this does, all right? This looks very much like the parametric, except that you just have frequency and gain. You don't have a Q value because these are, by design, very, very super narrow. So remember our Q value before was like 8 and it was like this? Yeah, these are probably, think 24. And you can actually adjust. Oh, how funny. I said it's super narrow, right? We say super in 26, like all the time now. Super awesome, super excellent. These are super narrow. If you just make it narrow, can you see the difference there, right? Versus super narrow. Notch filtering should be, by design, super narrow. And that's what it is. And that's going to allow you to knock out things like, again, 60 cycle hum. That's really primarily where you use these, if you use them at all. I generally don't, because to remove hum and stuff like that, actually using the noise reduction filter is more effective and less sonically destructive, because this will also take out anything that's in that 60 hertz range and the subsequent harmonics of 60, which for me can often be my voice. So I don't use notch filtering really ever. That's why the FFT is even better, because it really offers you a combination of the two. You can plot multiple points in the FFT filter. So you can say, I want to attenuate, 400 hertz, at, minus 300 dB. That's very, very extreme here. You can use splines, right? Bezier curves, right? So we have these in all of these, in many of these different effects. If you want to apply these notches, high pass, low pass, in the way that we actually hear them, you want to be in the logarithmic mode, okay? This is going to give you more control for attenuating or boosting bass frequencies. If you want it to be, if you want to work in a linear fashion, You can use linear, but again, now you don't have visually. You can't exactly dial into those ranges. In fact, even in the frequency analysis, you can see I'm always monitoring in logarithmic. This is the way we hear. This is just, it's so much easier to work that way. Not that you can't use linear. Go right ahead. You're just going to have more detail, let me rephrase that. More accuracy in trying to identify certain frequencies and attenuate them in the logarithmic mode. Additionally here, if you go into advanced, you can set this, and I'm just looking at my time. Ooh, wow, we're really over. FFT size, which is defaulting here to 8192. And it's going to be a trade-off here between like frequency and time accuracy. I will generally not really ever change this default. Lower FFT sizes technically will kind of give you more control, sort of preserving faster transient attacks for things like percussive instruments and such. Higher, again, sometimes higher, more granularity can come with diminishing returns. I will typically keep this anywhere from 4096 to 8192, never go any much lower, never go much higher. This is just kind of a best practice here, and I think for most applications this works great. Now, this is just like plotting it on a graph, you can see here. So if we were to, is there a full reset in this one, by the way? There is no full reset in here. Okay, there should be. Here's the reset button. There we go, right there. Probably has that in the other one too, and I just didn't notice it. This is where you can say, okay, I want to roll off everything at 100 hertz, right? Very aggressively. And you can do that. Okay, and you just created a roll off everything below 100. Why I pulled this up to show you is that there's some great presets in here. Now you'll even see we've got even like a de-esser in here, okay? Some DS presets. We've got some mastering presets. Probably wouldn't go with those, although you could. The most useful ones, though, these two right here. Kill the mic rumble and kill the subharmonics. These are presets that I built in years and years ago. And they will do just that. And I've shown this where if you have a plosive, a popping P, all you have to do is select the plosive, use this preset. And here, I'll show you that actually very quickly because I do have it on hand. Get rid of that plosive in just a moment. Go into my folder here. And it just works brilliantly. Okay. Plosives. All right. So I've shown this before, but here's another great opportunity to show it again with the FFT filter. Beam, 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 beam. So I've got this B sound, okay? Which is really, you can feel it. This is all this low end. I popped the B there. Effects, filter and EQ, FFT, kill the mic rumble, apply, softens it up. So now, beans, beans, beans. You still hear the B of the beans, but here was the before. Beans, beans. Of course, a truck has to go by. I'm flipping him a bird. Bean, bean, bean. Too much. Redo FFT. Beans, so beans. Smoother, better. And you can even just see visually it looks better, okay? Here's another one here. Like crazy, cray. Okay? Even though that's not a popping P, you've got this burst of low frequency air that's causing this pop. Repeat last command, kill the mic rumble, watch what happens to the wave. Look at it right there. Crazy. Now you've still got the slight air distortion, but that boom sound is gone, okay? Feed. Here are these kinds of things where you like stop talking. Feed. All right. Select it. Repeat last command. Apply. Feed. Okay. Genius. Brilliant. Unlooper. There you go. Yes. Synapse uses it too. While punching the keyboard to remove rumble. And that's the thing that you like, yeah, those sounds all the time, right? So this is a great way to get rid of those things. So FFT, notch filtering, graphic equalization, parametric equalization, sweeping the bands, knowing which bands to identify, right? Key frequencies to keep in mind, okay? Did we ever find that on my blog? I don't know if CBR is still here. I don't know if you found that blog article, if it's up there. Key frequencies to keep in mind. Again, polar patterns can also often determine. By the way, in terms of equalization for voice, and I've mentioned this, I believe I talked about this in the Recording Your Voice, episode 1 of Audio 101. A lot of it has to do with your microphone, of course. Now, this being a multi-pattern condenser, this does not suffer from what is known as proximity effect, which is as I get closer to it, it accentuates bass. No, absolutely the opposite. In fact, if I get closer, it'll just keep sounding better, more clear, and then I will eventually just, too much air will go through that diaphragm and you'll get that popping P. Whereas microphones like, I don't know where my SM58 is here, but dynamic microphones have something called proximity effect, where as you get closer to them, it just, by design, accentuates the bass, makes it a little bit warmer, a little bit fatter. But that's something that you often have to attenuate or control with EQ, and parametric is the best way to do that because you can find right where that over-accentuated bassiness is and just attenuate it slightly. Keep in mind, it's always better. This is another last practice, and I'll leave you with this before we go to part 2 of the stream here, which is going to be working in Premiere Pro, but this is the end of Audio 101 Part 10. It's always better to attenuate, all right? You always want, you want to cut more than boost. When you're boosting, you're artificially adding. Not to say you can't add, of course. You're always, adding EQ is normal, but it's safer to attenuate, okay? When you add, and it's easy to add too much, you can start to get into scary territory. So you just want to be mindful. You just want to be careful. But again, always cool, always a little bit better to attenuate, to take things out. And keep in mind that the ear doesn't hear, it doesn't perceive any change in amplitude that's less than a dB and a half. So if you're, attenuating something 0.8 in the context of a larger mix, it can make a difference, but you may not necessarily hear it right away. If you're working on one file, and you do a -1, -1.5, you're not necessarily going to hear that change right away. So then you might do too much, but it's still affecting it. So you have to just be careful, and that's where having a good listening environment, a good pair of headphones or a good pair of listening monitors really helps you. And it's always a good idea to check on multiple devices, right? Speakers, headphones, earbuds, mono speaker. Many people in audio and video and gaming have it going out to, via HDMI to a television. Check it on TV speakers. That's a great way to really determine whether it's fairly balanced or if it's too bassy or too overmodulated. Television speakers will emphasize that stuff greatly. And then you'll know, okay, I need to roll off a little bit. All right. Oh, and there you go. CBR's got the session out, the 2013. Oh, that might be too old. I don't know if that's it or not. Yeah, is that the one, CBR? That seems like way long ago. I'm not sure, but if you guys want it, just whisper me here. And thank you again for watching. I am Beetlejace. You can follow me here on twitch.tv/Beetlejace for more audio, video, motion graphics, and photography. I will be bouncing over to my channel after my stream today briefly, just to chat and talk a little bit about an upcoming release of mine. So with that, thank you so much for watching Audio 101 Part 10, How to Use EQ. And that's, again, whether you're using it in Audition or Premiere, any digital audio workstation, any video editing application. Key frequencies to remember, you saw the document there. Parametric for really the most control, graphic for fast, get to it with, minimal controls, but just a fast and easy way. Notch filtering for traditionally removing things like hums, broadband, continuous sounds that occupy multiple harmonics. And then FFT filtering, which is really a great way and a super fantastic, super way to attack common problems that happen for things like voiceover, plosives, subsonic rumble. Great for remastering vinyl. If you don't have a subsonic filter on your turntable preamp, you have a lot of subsonic noise. We've got a preset built in there to remove just that subsonic rumble. Also, by the way, you can use the parametric or the FFT to create the IRAA traditional EQ curve for LP playback. So if you're doing kind of a straight transfer of LP, you can do that. I actually had built one years ago. I think you can still find it online. Thank you so much. Stick around.